Ambassador Puzder, thank you so much for joining us. What a day to have you with us here on Europe Today. There's a lot to digest. But first, let's just start perhaps with President Trump's attempts to end the war in Ukraine. Is President Trump trying to push President Zelensky into signing a deal before Christmas?
You know, I'm not involved in the negotiations on Ukraine, and I'm reluctant to comment. We've got Ambassador Witkoff, we've got Secretary Rubio, Jared Kushner, people that are involved, and anything I might say would, since I'm not involved, might damage those negotiations.
But the fact that you're based in Brussels, you do understand how the Europeans work. So why do you think the Russians are getting such soft treatment?
Again, I'm not any comments I made in that respect could impact the negotiations, and it just
you might lose your job.
Look, we all want peace in Ukraine. We all want the killing to stop. And I don't want to make a comment that might damage the negotiations that could lead to that peace. And since I'm not involved, it would be easy for me to make a mistake and say the wrong thing.
Indeed, especially on live TV. You don't want to make that mistake. But perhaps you could talk to us about how the US administration feel about the frozen Russian assets. Is the US on board with this?
Again, the United States hasn't taken a position on that. That's a European event, a European solution. I'm not sure that all the Europeans agree on it. I know how the Belgians feel. I know how the rest of Europe feels. So that's not something we're going to get into the middle of. That's a European decision.
But there are reports that the US administration have been calling bilaterally EU capitals, telling them not to sign up to this deal.
I've heard those reports. I don't know anybody who's done that, and I haven't spoken to anybody at the EU who's gotten that kind of contact. So again, this is just not. I'm happy to talk to you about the economy or any areas you want to talk about or President Trump's comments. But while there's negotiations going on to end this horrific war in Ukraine, it just would be irresponsible of me to comment because I'm just not involved in those negotiations.
You're not involved. But please, I'm sure our listeners would love you to comment on President Trump's plans and the various comments we've heard across the last couple of days on the national security strategy. Is this a campaign, do you think, Ambassador, to dismantle the European Union?
Well, it's interesting. The coverage of the national security strategy, when I read it, I thought, this thing's going to be terrible. I went and read it, and it's really not that bad. The section on Europe is titled A Proposal for European Greatness. It's not called We Don't Like Europe, We Want Europe to Go Away. And if you read down a little bit, it says that Europe is, I think I'm going to get the quote right, Europe is strategically and culturally vital to the United States. You read a little further, it says our transatlantic trade relationship, which is the largest trade relationship in the world, is a pillar of the global economy and of American prosperity. So I did not read it at all as an attempt to dissolve the European Union.
But does it suggest going back to nation states?
Well, I think the thrust of it is that you do have 27 sovereign states. So it's not going back to sovereign states. You have 27 sovereign states. The question is, how much of their sovereignty did they give up to be part of an economic union? Did they give up the sovereignty to determine who comes into or out of their countries? Did they give up the sovereignty on cultural issues that might be different in Eastern Europe than they are in Western Europe? So
when it says Europe's weak and decaying, who's weak? Who is President Trump referring to?
Well, if you look at the European Union overall, you'll see the GDP, the nominal GDP, it was ahead of the United States, the European Union, in 2011. So that's 14 years ago. For me, that doesn't seem so long ago. That's recent memory. Today, if you include the United Kingdom, it's about 20% below the IMF is projecting for this year. If you take the United Kingdom out, it's almost a third below. This is a huge drop. And even more impressively, I think for citizens in Europe, for the people of Europe, GDP per capita, in other words, economic growth in a country per person, GDP per capita in Germany, the industrial giant of Europe, is now below that of the state of West Virginia in the 49th worst state.
Europeans know that as well. I mean, they don't really need this document to state it, but just this idea of
you asked what's the weakness, and then if you look at Spain, Italy, France, the French economy, and you look at the EU overall, and include the UK, I'll include the UK in this too, just for fairness. They're below the state of Mississippi, which is the 50th lowest GDP per capita U.S. state. So when you ask where's the weakness, this is an economic weakness.
So it's not pointing at a particular person. And just this idea of Europe staying Europe, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean a white Christian Europe?
No, I think it means, and I would say this for the United States too, when people are are immigrating into the United States, if you're not going to contribute economically, if you don't want to become a part of the society, if in fact you reject the basic tenets of that society, it's probably people we don't want. Those are the kind of people that come in, and you see an increase in the crime rate. You see a decrease in the kind of cultural values people have. I think there are even European cities where the police now are afraid to go in or don't go into certain sections. They're governed by different legal standards. I think what he's saying is that that we don't want to see Europe lose its identity as Europe because
Ambassador, we're going to have to leave it there. But do come back to us, please, again, soon here on Europe Today.